There is a town in the Norwegian Arctic where polar bears sleep in abandoned apartments. There is a town in Poland that didn't appear on any map. Not because it was small, because the Soviet Union decided it shouldn't exist. There is a town in Siberia where the calendars on the wall still show the year the mines exploded. The Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, the ideology evaporated, the towns stayed. 10 of them, scattered from the Arctic Circle to the edge of Germany, each one a different answer to the same question. What does an empire look like when it stops believing in itself? Real places, real stories, no filler. Welcome to Fallow Empire. Number 10. Klłomino, Poland. A town that didn't exist. Not officially. Not on any Polish map. Not in any public record. For 48 years, if you were Polish and you drove past the right stretch of forest in northwestern Poland, you would have seen nothing. Road signs didn't point to it. No postal route served it. The Polish state had no knowledge of what was inside. What was inside? 6,000 Soviet soldiers, barracks, armories, schools, a full functioning military town hidden in plain sight on foreign soil. The Soviet Union didn't just occupy territory, it erased itself from the address. Klłomino, the Soviets called it Grodek, was one of dozens of military installations the USSR maintained inside the Eastern Bloc countries they called allies. A Soviet garrison, sealed, self-sufficient, invisible. The Poles who lived nearby knew something was there. They just weren't allowed to ask what. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and Russian forces finally withdrew from Poland in 1993, they left. The buildings didn't. Today, Klłomino is a ghost town of crumbling concrete blocks, stripped interiors, empty parade grounds. The Polish government tried to sell it. No one wanted it. The forest is slowly taking it back, one building at a time, erasing what the Soviets worked so hard to hide, a town that appeared on no map. It turns out that's a hard thing to come back from. Number 9. Skrunda 1, Latvia, the eyes of the Soviet Union. Built in 1963 in the pine forests of western Latvia, Skrunda 1 was one of the USSR's most critical early warning radar stations. 2 massive Dnieper radar arrays, each as tall as a building, each pointed at Western Europe, were built here to do one thing: watch for incoming nuclear missiles before they arrived. The town around the radar was purpose-built: schools, apartments, a cultural center. Nearly 5,000 people, of soldiers and their families, lived here in complete secrecy. Skrunda didn't appear on Soviet civilian maps. It had its own electricity grid, its own supply chains, its own internal logic. It was built to watch the end of the world coming. It just didn't see its own. When Latvia declared independence in 1991, Skrunda 1 became a problem. Russia was allowed to keep the radar operational until 1998 under a negotiated agreement. In May 1995, American demolition experts, invited in by the Latvian government, detonated the half-finished Daryl radar tower. Tens of thousands of Latvians lined the roads to watch a 19-story Soviet structure fall. Russia withdrew in 1998. The town was abandoned. Latvia eventually sold it at auction for 12,000 euros, less than a decent used car. The largest radar ever built on Latvian soil, sold for less than a second-hand Volkswagen. Number 8. Tskaltubo, Georgia, a spa town for the Soviet elite. Then a refugee camp, then nothing. In the 1930s, Stalin discovered Tskaltubo, a small town in western Georgia with natural radon carbonate springs, and decided it would become a showcase of Soviet leisure. Sanatoria were built, grand colonnaded bathhouses, a direct rail line from Moscow. 14,000 people per year came to take the waters. Stalin himself came, though in secret, through a private tunnel that still exists beneath one of the sanatoriums. At its peak, Tskaltubo was where the Soviet Union went to heal itself. Then the Soviet Union ended, and Tskaltubo received a different kind of arrival. 200,000 Georgian refugees displaced by the war in Abkhazia in 1993. They moved into the abandoned sanatoria. Families in grand ballrooms, children in hydrotherapy chambers. The colonnaded facades still said health resort, while the people inside had nothing. Most of the refugees are gone now. The buildings remain, magnificent, rotting, their frescoed ceilings peeling above empty marble floors. Tskaltubo is now one of the largest collections of abandoned Soviet architecture on Earth. A palace of healing. They couldn't fix what broke it. Number 7. Irbene, Latvia. One man drove 300 kilometers to see a radio telescope. He found a ghost town no one told him about. Irbene was built around a single purpose, the RT-32, one of the largest radio telescopes in the Northern Hemisphere, 32 meters across, designed not to look at stars, but to intercept phone calls, satellite communications, military signals. The Soviet Union built an entire town around this ear, pointed at the west, then hid it in a Latvian forest. The town had cafes, a power station, residential blocks, all of it invisible to the outside world. Irbene didn't listen to the universe, it listened to you. When Russian forces withdrew from Latvia in 1993, they tried to destroy the telescope. They ripped out the drive mechanisms, cut the cables, flooded the underground facilities. What they didn't count on, Latvian scientists arrived before the damage was complete and saved it. The RT-32 now operates as a legitimate research telescope under the Latvian Academy of Sciences. You can visit it with a permit. The town around it sits empty. The cafes are stripped. The apartments are dark. The telescope survived. The people it was built for are gone. Number 6. Wunsdorf, Germany, 20 miles outside Berlin. The largest Soviet military base that ever existed outside the Soviet Union. Wunsdorf had been German military headquarters since the Kaiser. The Nazis used it as a command center through the Second World War. When Soviet forces took it in 1945, they didn't leave for nearly 50 years. At its peak, 50,000 Soviet soldiers and their families, schools, hospitals, theaters, a direct daily train to Moscow, because Moscow didn't trust its soldiers to interact with Germans any more than necessary. The Soviets called it Mali Moskva, Little Moscow, a Soviet city transplanted onto German soil. The Berlin Wall fell. Wunsdorf kept going. By the time Soviet forces finally withdrew in 1994, the last Russian troops to leave German territory, the population had collapsed to 6,000. They left in chaos. Some soldiers, uncertain where they were being sent, uncertain whether housing existed for them back home, bought buses. They lived in them, parked outside the base they'd just evacuated. Today, Wunsdorf is partly reclaimed. Some buildings converted, some used by the German military, some swallowed entirely by forest. The grandest structures stand at the intersection of 3 empires, Prussian, Nazi, Soviet. Each one used this place, each one left. 50 years of occupation, they packed it up and drove away in buses. Number 5. Kadykchan, Russia. Built by people who had no choice. Abandoned by people who had no options. Kadykchan sits in the Kolyma highlands of Russia's Far East, a region so remote it takes 3 days to reach the nearest city. The road connecting it to the outside world is called the Kolyma Highway. Locals call it the Road of Bones, because that is what it was paved with. Gulag prisoners worked to death during construction, buried where they fell. Kadykchan itself was built by those same prisoners in the 1940s. The coal beneath the permafrost was worth having. The prisoners were already there. The Soviet Union called this efficiency, a town built on the dead to extract something from the frozen ground. By the 1980s, Kadykchan had 10,000 residents, families, schools, a cinema, central heating that actually worked. And then the Soviet Union collapsed, and the subsidies stopped, and the coal became economically worthless. One mine closed in 1992. In 1996, the second mine exploded. A methane buildup, 6 workers killed. The government offered residents money to leave. Not much, enough. Within 5 years, the town was empty. Today, the apartments still have furniture. dishes in the cupboards, shoes by the doors, calendars on walls, frozen on the last year anyone cared to turn the page. 10,000 people, then 6 dead in an explosion, then silence. Number 4, Neftegorsk, Russia. This one didn't empty slowly. Neftegorsk was an oil town on Sakhalin Island in Russia's far east. Built in the 1960s to house workers and their families at a cluster of petroleum extraction sites. By the mid-1990s, it had around 3,000 residents, apartment blocks, a school, an ordinary Soviet industrial settlement doing what it was built to do. On May 28, 1995, at 12 minutes past 1 in the morning, the earthquake arrived. Magnitude 7.6, the worst earthquake in modern Russian history. It lasted for 17 seconds. 17 seconds to kill more than half a town. At least 2,040 people died. Most were asleep. The apartment buildings, typical Soviet panel construction, never designed for seismic activity, never tested against it, collapsed completely. Search and rescue teams worked for weeks. The death toll kept rising. The Soviet Union had built Neftegorsk for oil. It had built the buildings quickly and cheaply and without accounting for what the ground beneath Sakhalin Island had always been capable of doing. The survivors were relocated. Neftegorsk was never rebuilt. The Russian government decided the ground here is not to be trusted. Today a chapel stands, a cemetery, a memorial listing the names. The buildings fell in 17 seconds. The memorial took years to build. Number 3, Ozyorsk, Russia, City 40. This one isn't abandoned, that's what makes it worse. Ozyorsk, officially Chelyabinsk 40, later Chelyabinsk 65, now Ozyorsk, was built in 1945 to house the workers of the Mayak plutonium facility. Mayak produced the plutonium for the Soviet Union's first nuclear weapon. The city around it was sealed, secret, erased from Soviet maps. Citizens required KGB security clearance to enter. Soviet citizens, their own country. In 1957, a cooling system failure at Mayak caused an explosion that released radioactive material across nearly 20,000 square kilometers. The Soviet government didn't tell the residents of Ozyorsk. They didn't tell anyone. They classified it. The contaminated river continued to flow. People continued to drink from it. The Kadykchan disaster is the 3rd worst nuclear accident in history. You've probably never heard of it. Ozyorsk is still a closed city. You still need a pass to enter. Approximately 90,000 people live there today. Many of them descendants of the original workers. Many of them employed by the same facility their grandparents were sent to in secret. The residents don't want it opened. It has good schools, low crime, a sense of community built on shared silence, a city that was never on the map. The people inside stopped asking why. Number 2, Pripyat, Ukraine. You know the name, you don't know all of it. Pripyat was built in 1970 as a model Soviet city, designed not just to house Chernobyl nuclear power plant workers, but to show what Soviet urban planning could achieve. Wide boulevards, a fairground, a cultural palace, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, almost 50,000 residents by 1986, average age 26, the youngest city in the Soviet Union on purpose. Youth meant productivity. Productivity meant the future. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 exploded. The Soviet Union didn't tell Pripyat for 36 hours. Residents went to work the next morning. Children went to school. A wedding took place. People stood on a bridge to watch the reactor fire. The glow looked beautiful from a distance, they said later, those who survived. Scientists now call it the Bridge of Death. The radiation dose received there on that clear spring night was enough to kill. The evacuation order came at 2 p.m. on April 27th. Residents were told to bring 3 days of belongings. They were told they would be back. They were never back. The fairground rides, never opened, are still there. The Ferris wheel turns slowly in the wind. 2,000 letters written before the evacuation and never sent still sit in the post office. 50,000 people asked to pack for 3 days. 38 years later, the packing is still there. Number 1. Pyramiden, Svalbard. At 78 degrees north, on a Norwegian island between mainland Europe and the North Pole, an Arctic Soviet colony with a grand piano, an imported lawn, and a Lenin statue staring at a glacier. The Soviet Union bought Pyramiden in 1927 from Sweden for reasons that had nothing to do with coal. The coal was the justification. The presence, planting a Soviet flag on an Arctic archipelago belonging to Norway, made legal by a 1920 treaty, was the point. They built it like they meant to stay forever. Shipped in soil from Ukraine, actual topsoil by the boatload, to create the northernmost decorative lawn on Earth. Built a swimming pool that was the best on the island. Norwegian children from the nearby settlement came to use it. Built a concert hall, a cinema with 1,000 film archive, a cultural palace with a grand piano, still tuned when the last residents left. The coal never paid for itself. That was never the point. At its peak, Pyramiden housed over 1,000 people, miners, families, a self-sufficient Soviet community on foreign soil, enduring months of polar darkness, watched over by a Lenin statue that still stands in the town square today. In 1996, a charter flight carrying 141 people, mostly Pyramiden workers and their families, crashed on approach to Svalbard. Everyone died. The community never recovered. By 1998, the mines closed, the subsidies dried up, and the last resident walked down to the dock and didn't come back. The dishes are still in the cafeteria. The plants were still on windowsills when explorers arrived weeks later, wilting but not yet dead. Today, 6 people live in Pyramiden in summer. The Lenin statue still watches the glacier. The polar bears sleep in the apartments. The piano may still hold its tune. The Soviet Union built a utopia at the edge of the world to prove something to no one. It is still there. Fallow Empire.